Great. So we'll go ahead and get started. And we want to start off by thanking you all once again for making us a part of your afternoon. I know there's a million other things you could have been doing, but you decided to join us and indulge in this conversation, great conversation in diversity and STEM, diversity in science. My name is Beto Vasquez. I'm going to be your moderator for this afternoon. As we take a walk through diversity and what that means and what that looks like for different experiences and different personal narratives that we're going to hear. This is the second 7 sessions for the the STEM Summer Series that's being brought to you by CREATE at UC San Diego. And for this installation, we've partnered up with Qualcomm Institute, so we want to thank them for the opportunity to be able to host this wonderful panel this afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started because I do want to be mindful of time, and I'm going to take a moment to briefly introduce our panelists for today, and then I'll follow that up by giving them an opportunity to tell you a little bit more about themselves, and then we'll get right to it. Start asking some questions, and then so start getting your questions ready for them as we move forward. So our first speaker, our first panelist here is a dear friend of mine, and she goes by Laser Chick. If you were checking her out on social media channels and such, let me introduce you to Dr. Desiree Whitmore, who is the senior physics educator with the Exploratorium up in the Bay Area. As a Southern California native, Dr. Desiree Whitmore, aka Laser Chick, began her education in community college and holds degrees in physical science, chemical sciences, engineering, and chemical and material physics. Desiree has held positions as a science curriculum specialist with Amplify Science, a professor of laser and photonics technology at Irvine Valley College. And as I mentioned earlier, she is now the senior physics educator in the Teacher Institute at the Exploratorium in San Francisco. Her current work is focused on providing support and professional development to middle and high school science teachers to help them teach through inquiry. So thank you, Desiree, for being a part of us this afternoon. Our next panelist is Dr. Anthony Bell, who recently joined the University of San Diego faculty in 2016, maybe not too recent, but recently within the decade. So we welcome him and thank him for being here in San Diego. Dr. Bell's teaching interests focus on biochemistry lecture and laboratory courses. He focuses on incorporating relevant biological chemistry topics into all of his courses. And I'll allow him to tell you a little bit more about his research because he'll probably do due diligence more than I will. Dr. Bell also enjoys mentoring undergraduate researchers, and to date, members of the Bell Lab have received numerous fellowships and awards. So I think that's definitely a testament to the incredible work that he does with those folks that he mentors. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Bell. Our next panelist is future Dr. Dominguez Sanchez, who is a UCSD alumna and received her Bachelor's of Science degree in Structural Engineering, during which she was a camp scholar in 2008 and participated in research involving earthquake engineering. She is currently pursuing a doctoral degree in Civil and Construction Engineering Department at Oregon State University. Her research interests include innovative pedagogies in engineering education and efforts for inclusion and diversity within engineering, some of which have led to being able to implement modular learning materials that introduce engineering grad students to engineering and social justice discussions, including concepts of difference, power, and privilege as they relate to engineering culture and context. Thank you and welcome, Dominga. And last but definitely not least, our very own Professor Adam Burgesser here at UC San Diego is an astrophysicist in the Department of Physics at UC San Diego. In addition to his observational research on the lowest mass stars and extrasolar planets, Professor Bergasser is deeply committed to addressing barriers to equity and inclusion in STEM. He has served as the chair of the National American Astronomical Society Committee on the Status of Minorities in Astronomy, and is a UCSD lead fellow and member of the executive committees for the UCSD Black Academic Excellence Initiative and the Black Studies Project. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Burgesser. So as I previously mentioned, you know, it's always interesting to read kind of the credentials that folks have, right? But it's a whole nother story to be able to hear a little bit more from them intimately about how is it that they got to where they're at, right? How is it that we're reading all these wonderful accolades about these individuals, but what was the path? What was the journey like for them to get to those points? So at this point, I'd like to invite the panelists each to share, you know, 3 to 5 minutes about your history, about anything that you feel might be valuable for students to be able to know when we're talking about diversity in STEM. Anybody like to go first? All right, we're gonna volunteer people. Fantastic. All right, so we'll go in order of the slides, right? And I think we'll start with Desiree, please.
All right. Hola. Hi, everybody. I'm sad that I don't see all of your faces. Like nobody has their camera on for some reason. So whatever. I see how it is. It's cool. So my name is Dr. Desiree Whitmore. I'm in San Francisco at the Exploratorium, which if you've never heard of it, it's a museum, and it's the museum of, oh, there we go. Okay, I see you. It's the Museum of Science, Arts, and Human Perception. So it's basically like a giant hands-on museum where we don't teach you anything. You just come in and you play with everything and you teach yourself science. It's a pretty amazing place. I highly recommend you all come. You all have an open invitation once the world starts up again to send me an email, and I will get you in for free. Just let me know where you heard about me and I will bring you to the museum. So my background is I'm Blaxican American. I was born in Los Angeles, and I grew up in the Antelope Valley, which is like the desert. It's the Mojave Desert, like outside of LA. And probably nobody knows what it is because it's in the middle of nowhere. And so I started in community college. I changed my major a couple times in community college. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was like, I want to be a musician. I want to be a mathematician. And then I really liked chemistry, and I really liked physics, and I liked all of the things. And eventually I settled on chemical engineering. And so after community college, I transferred to UCLA and I got a degree in chemical engineering. And while I was there, I realized that I hate chemical engineering and I don't want to be an engineer. And so I decided, you know what, like what I really love is chemistry and physics, the two. And so I went and got my master's and my PhD from UC Irvine, which is closer to San Diego, right? So I went a little bit down south, and I went to UC Irvine and I earned my master's and my PhD in chemical and material physics. So it was like a very interdisciplinary program where like I could study from both departments, chemistry and physics. I could work in whatever department I wanted to work in. As well as engineering, and I got to basically define my own PhD, which was super awesome. And I studied lasers, and I was like at the intersection of like lasers and microscopy, spectroscopy, and material science. So I was really studying like how fast molecules move when they vibrate. I was trying to take pictures of that. And then I went on to UC Berkeley, and I did a postdoc there for a few years, and I was building even faster lasers, like giant lasers. And that's where I met Professor Vasquez Mena over there. I see you, dude. Because he was a postdoc at the same time as me there at UC Berkeley. He's amazing. If any of you are UC San Diego students, you should take his classes because he's super dope. You know, I was there for a few years, and I realized I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do research. I love it, but I love teaching even more. So I left and I became a curriculum developer. So I worked for a science museum in Berkeley called the Lawrence Hall of Science, which is basically UC Berkeley's museum for kids. It's not a great museum, but it's okay, you know. And we wrote curriculum. So I wrote, it's called Amplify Science curriculum. It's a K-8 science curriculum that is used all over the country now. It's used in, I think, 42 of the 50 states, which is pretty awesome. And it made me realize that like my PhD in physics and my experience with chemistry and with chemical engineering and all of these things is so diverse. And it doesn't have to be in academia. I could do so much more with my degree. I'm not stuck in academia. Not that like people in academia are stuck. That's just what they choose to do, right? But there are so many more options of what you can do. And I left that position when the curriculum was done, and I became a professor. I was a physics professor and a laser technology professor back in Irvine at a community college. And I was really teaching laser technicians, like how to become, how to make more money than I make building and repairing laser systems. And then I found out about this job at the Exploratorium, and what I do here is I teach teachers. So we've got high school teachers and middle school teachers. I bring them to the museum. I teach them science in a very hands-on, engaging way so that they can really, their students can understand science on a much deeper level than just lecturing at them. And I'm going to shut up now so that other people can talk.
Thank you so much for that, Desiree. Dr. Bell, would you care to go next?
Yes, my name is Tony Bell. I am from Mississippi, and I'm happy to say now with some encouragement from the NCAA and the SEC that the state flag of Mississippi has now been changed. So that's one good thing. In terms of my path here, for me, I guess it all started with having strong mentors and strong family. I went to undergraduate school at Millsaps College, which is in Mississippi. I got my PhD from NYU in biophysics, biomolecular work, biochemistry. I did a first postdoc at Columbia University. It was involving human gene therapy, and the goal there was to treat and eventually, hopefully, ameliorate sickle cell disease. After that, second postdoc at Mass General in Boston. And then from there, I started my teaching career, or PI career, whatever you want to call it, at the University of Southern Mississippi. So I went back home, and I was there for about 5 years. Then I headed out here to USD. And so in terms of my research really started with working with a DNA binding protein when I was at NYU, and we were really focused on what it did inside of cells. My postdoctoral work was more applied in terms of dealing with disease work, and now I've essentially returned back to my original PhD stuff with a new twist. And we look at what that DNA binding protein does in terms of involving immunology. So this thing is associated with a bunch of different diseases like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and we try to figure out different ways to attenuate its functionality in cells and hopefully develop inhibitors to block it to hopefully and improve these disease states. But the underlying theme, I guess, for me in science has been my relationship with mentors. I mean, I wouldn't be here without people supporting me from, junior high to high school to college. I mean, all throughout the route. And I've been fortunate in that regard. And that's why I put on my bio the things that I enjoy doing, because it wouldn't be science with me if it wasn't for people helping me. And I know that can be a tricky space, being, a Black person, underrepresented person, because there's not that many people out there that look like us, right? So the people who have helped me have not necessarily been people who look like me. And I think the important thing in selecting a mentor is that they often select you. And it's like the person that I think it was, I saw this in the Tonys, my wife's niece, she's a cast member in a play. And I think one of the cast members there said, you want a person, when you walk in the room, their face lights up, right? That like they take an interest in you. Those are the people who are going to be your mentors. They don't necessarily have to be the PI that you're working with in your lab. They can be someone that's not necessarily in your discipline, but it can be someone who can interconnect you with other people that they know to help you. So for me, science is all about, reaching out to people and getting the right level of mentoring, and then, you doing it yourself when you have the chance. So I guess with that, I will step off the mentoring soapbox.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bell. Much appreciated. It really lends itself to thinking about a conversation that was started at the last session that we had, was thinking about mentors and sponsors, right? And those things individually. And so maybe we can touch on that later in the conversation. Right now, we're going to go ahead and pivot over to future Dr. Dominguez Sanchez, another great friend. Dominga, would you mind sharing a few words about yourself and your journey?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. My name is Dominga. I started off at community college in Santa Monica. I stayed there for a couple of years as Desiree, also exploring, unsure of what I was going to do. I'm a first generation, so I didn't really have my parents weren't like you should do this or you should do that. So I was exploring for a while, and I think that the moment I realized I didn't even know what engineering was or if that was a possibility until I was like 24. So, but one of the things that really motivated me to pursue engineering was physics. I loved physics. I had taken all of the math courses at Santa Monica College. There was nothing else to take, and my counselor was like, well, what else are you going to take? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what I want to do. I don't want to do architecture. So I did architecture and math for a bit. And he introduced me to engineering. And I said, well, how do I get there? And like, well, why don't you take a physics class? If you enjoy it, then this is probably the right direction. And I did. It was an amazing experience. And then I transferred to UC San Diego. I at the time I was a single parent with 2 kids. So I took my family to UC San Diego and finished my undergraduate, worked on campus for a while with Create and EAOP. And then I heard, I had, just like Dr. Bell said, you run into these mentors, these great mentors that kept pushing me and said, you need to go to grad school. You need to go to grad school. And that wasn't an option. I mean, I didn't consider it an option for me until I participated in CAMP, the California Alliance for Minority Participation. I didn't know that research can be stressful and fun at the same time. I don't know how else to say it. But I enjoyed doing research for 2 years at UC San Diego. And after I was introduced to the education world with Create, and a lot of what's going on in our communities, I started thinking about, what I can do with engineering and education. I learned a lot while I was at UC San Diego about STEM outreach and working with PIs and NSF grants. And that is really what motivated me to pursue my PhD in engineering education. So I'm here at Oregon State, working both in the civil engineering department, which is my content background, but also looking into the engineering education field.
Excellent. Thank you, Dominga, for sharing. And I got to tell you, not many places that I'm at that I see somebody say, hey, I like physics, and there's so many smiles that lit up. I saw Desiree and Adam's, big smile, that just so much excitement for physics, right? We're in a whole new era, I got to tell you. Thank you, Dominga, for sharing that. And definitely last but not least, Dr. Adam Burgesser.
Thanks, Beto, and thanks so much for including me on this really amazing panel. And I really appreciate everyone that took their time out this afternoon to attend as well. As Beto mentioned, I'm a professor at UCSD, and I'm an astrophysicist, which means I get to use some of the largest telescopes in the world to study some of the smallest stars in the universe and also find planetary systems. One of my most recent discoveries that you might have heard of is the Trappist-1 system, which is this really amazing system of 7 Earth-sized planets orbiting a nearby tiny little star. And that's been really fun. It's an exciting area to work on. And it's an opportunity to really kind of see what the universe looks like in different ways. It's also been a great opportunity to involve students in all kinds of backgrounds in this work. I've had computer science students working on the spectra of stars, and art students working on how to sonify and visualize different kinds of data. Astronomy is like one of these great fields that allows you to kind of come from very different, diverse backgrounds and diverse perspectives and learn something about the universe, because we all live in this universe. It's great. A little bit about my background. I come from Buffalo, New York, and I was actually an alum of UCSD. I came to UCSD as an undergraduate student because I couldn't think of a place that was further away from Buffalo, New York. By that time, I was kind of done with blizzards and snow, and I thought San Diego was a good alternative for that. And I was really fortunate to work with Sally Ride while I was here, who's the first female astronaut who was a faculty member in physics at UCSD. and was also a tremendous mentor and was someone that really inspired me to go on and to consider grad school. I think like other people in this panel, I didn't come from a family that did science or had advanced degrees. I was the first person in my family to go on to get a PhD. And it was great to have someone who had that perspective and that, push to say, hey, this is something you're interested in. You should just go for it and you should just apply. And you should see how far you can take this. And I originally went to grad school with the objective of becoming an astronaut because I was very inspired by Dr. Ride. And then realized that I was probably a lot better at astrophysics than being an astronaut. So fortunately, I turned that into a job, so that's worked out really well. So I'm a white male, so if you know anything about demographics in STEM, you know that I'm coming in with a heap of unearned privilege in this area. And if you were to ask me maybe 12, 13 years ago, if I understood the aspects of inequities in my field, I would probably know kind of some things, but not really to the degree that I really see them today. And I think the thing that really turned me around is that before I was at UCSD, I worked at MIT for some years, and the department chair there had several of us faculty and some of the students go to the National Society of Black Physicists national meeting, which that year was in Nashville, Tennessee. And it was a transformative meeting to me to actually see a conference that was a diverse conference. It made you realize when you go to other national conferences just how different of a culture that sort of standard science culture can be compared to what's really the culture of our country and really the culture of the people that's in our community. So that really shook a lot of the sort of assumptions that I had made about what is how people get ahead in STEM and how things are objectively viewed. And I really started to learn a lot about how to address the inequities that I could see and start to build a culture of science in my own department, in our greater astronomy community that was really inclusive and was able to bring in diverse voices, not just to answer diverse questions, but to actually come up with diverse questions themselves, right? To ask questions that, folks that from my background just don't think about because we have a very different kind of background. And I think I'm maybe anticipating the question Beto's going to ask a little bit later, but when I think about diversity, I really think about it's important to have as many ideas, experiences, perspectives, because it's not just coming to solutions, but it's coming up with what are the real questions that we have to answer and what can science do? And that comes from having all kinds of backgrounds experience to that fore. So that's why I'm very excited to be involved in addressing equity and diversity in the STEM, and I'm very happy to be here to talk about it.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Burgesser. I really appreciate your candidness and kind of really just taking us there already, right? I think it's definitely an important conversation, important enough for us to do the session on and to be able to address that, right? To be able to say, hey, I might not see a lot of people that look like me that I can relate to, either because I'm a first generation student or because I'm from an underrepresented background. And so on and so forth. So the other thing I wanted to kind of touch on is if we think about the word diversity, it's something that we kind of hear a lot of, right? We hear it used in different contexts. And so I wanted to take a moment and start off by kind of defining what that is first, right? And if we were to look up the word diversity, right? And what I came up with was that it's basically elements that make individuals unique, right? Elements that make individuals unique. Now that's a pretty vague answer if you ask me, right? That could mean anything. And so I wanted to take a moment to ask you more, a little bit more detailed for you all. What does diversity mean to you? When you think about diversity, when you think about the experiences, the environments that you're in, what is it that your definition consists of when you think of diversity? And maybe we could start off with Dr. Burgesser now and work our way backward.
Yeah, thank you. So I think I kind of started answered part of that when I think about diversity, I really think about the diversity of experience, perception. In science, we're really, we're thinking from the mind, right? We want to sort of look at our world around us, look at patterns around us, and see these from different views to see what's actually underlying this particular physics problem or this particular, strange light in the sky. How can we actually study those things? And I think, one danger I particularly see in physical science departments is often that diversity is seen as it's almost a shallow diversity, right? If we have enough sort of mix of faces or, mix of genders, that somehow we've covered diversity, right? We've got it made. Okay, we have this one female professor, so we shouldn't have to worry about this. And it's a lot deeper than that, right? It's not just the who's in the room, but who's able to, be present and actually control the direction of how research is going. And so, I think when I think about diversity, I really think of it from a structural perspective. Are there aspects of the structure that, while some people may be able to make it into a faculty position, an industrial job, a graduate degree program, is that really a program that is inclusive of both their perspectives, their backgrounds, their experiences? And too often, I think we try to think, departments think of this in the way of sort of assimilating the scientists, right? We're bringing people from different backgrounds, but we want them to become this kind of scientist. And we really have to break that down. Everyone does science. Everyone is a scientist, right? We all live in this world. We can all observe it and measure it and study it. And the sooner that we can, set up a systematic structure where it's something that everyone can really do in the way that they can do it, I think that's when we've really reached diversity of science.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, very, very good points. I think you touched on a couple of different things that we think about when we think of diversity. I think a couple of things that really stood out to me was the opening one, right, which is the diversity of thought. And I think oftentimes that gets left out of the conversation because we have the tendency to kind of get caught up in physically what diversity can look like. Thank you very much for sharing that. Dr. Bell or Dominga, would you like to share kind of your definition or add to the definition of diversity?
Well, I could follow up with Dr. Bergesser that, when I think about diversity, I can't just think about the word diversity. I need to think about diversity and inclusion, because it's as a minority, right, going into a male-dominated field. It's not just being there as a minority to diversify the team or to diversify who's present, but it's also about, how do I feel when I go there? Do I feel that my voice is being heard? Are my ideas being valued? Am I being included? And I think that, when I talk about diversity and inclusion, or when I talk about diversity, I need to think about inclusion, not just for me, but for all other students, when I work with undergraduates also. How do they feel? It's been a interesting experience being a minority person in an engineering field. And I think that we still have a lot of work to do in order to have others feel comfortable and included in this space. But I think that it's possible. And one of the things that I like to do is continue working with students to communicate, to share, to feel comfortable to talk about these issues.
Yeah, and I think I'll echo some of the same points that were brought up. I mean, in terms of diversity, it's often, as we said before, it's been viewed through a lens of race, right? And then when you view things through a lens of race, then you have to think about how that connects with systematic racism and power. So, of course, the people of power, typically, white males who have a predominant foothold in science, have to view their interactions with us, and then that fits back into equity. Because as Adam said before, the thought gets lost. In my view of diversity, and Beto said this too, it's how different people show up in a place and not necessarily reach the same solution. It's the diversity that you have in your experiences that you bring to attempting to solve a problem that might open up more questions that are even more meaningful or impactful than what you set out course to solve. And another thing that, oh man, I'm losing. See now, I'm losing my train of thought now. I got too caught up. But yeah, I think that's the key to me of diversity. It's like you're bringing different people there, and it's also one thing that I've found in science. I've often been the only person, as I'm sure a lot of you often have. It's not assimilation, as Adam said before, because it's often you'll sit in a room and when people see you there, they think that you might necessarily you've ticked you fill the box in terms of a racial, I don't want to say quota, but that's kind of often what it is. And then they're somewhat uncomfortable with the answers that you supply because it's something that they're simply not familiar with. So it's that uncomfortable feeling that I think we might often present to people who are not familiar with people of different backgrounds. I guess that's the point that I'm getting to. And that's where we have to be, I guess, more accepting and comfortable within that space. Because, you know, people will often look at me and be like, wow, well, why did you say that? It's like, well, maybe that's because that's the first time you've ever heard of it coming from that, you know, perspective, because that's how I grew up. That's how I've always thought of things. That's often the thing that I think about when I initially start to solve a problem. And it's different, right? It's not necessarily wrong, but it's just different. So I think we need to reach some level of acceptance there. And I think that will help, I hope, not knock down a lot of these barriers in science through diversity.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing those very important points, Dr. Bell and Dominga. You know, I heard some very interesting and key words that I think oftentimes happen in higher education, but not necessarily in science and engineering or STEM. And that was inclusion and equity, right? Which I think are words that really go hand in hand when we're talking about diversity, as Dominga had pointed out. And as Dr. Bell kind of alluded to right now is we can't have one conversation without thinking, okay, if we have diversity, are we prepared to receive or foster that diversity, right? Are we being inclusive? Are we providing opportunities? And I think that those conversations go hand in hand. So I, you know, it's not a kind of a check off the box type of scenario, especially when we think about our personal experiences, our personal narratives, our backgrounds, you know, the struggles that we've gone through to get to where we're at, and that we're going to continue to face as we continue to move forward in our academic or professional journeys. Desiree, did you have something else that you would like to add to kind of the definition of diversity? We've heard so much about race. We've heard about diversity of thought. We've heard about the importance of inclusion and inequity. But is there maybe some other topics that perhaps you don't think we think of too much when we think of diversity?
Yeah, I think actually Dr. Bell said it really well when he said difference, right? To me, the definition of diversity means a bunch of different stuff, right? So like, you know, thinking about if you look at a group of all Black kids, let's say, and somebody will say, well, that's not a very diverse group there, right? Or some people will say, oh, that's diversity, because some people just, the definition of diversity means people of color, which is not accurate, right? But I think you can have a group of people who all identify similarly, but they're extremely diverse because they have this diverse way of thinking. They have diverse backgrounds. They have diverse ways of seeing the world, right? And so I think for me, it's all about differences. And like, if you ask me what the definition of diversity is, I would say it's all about differences. And so like, for me, for instance, I think of myself as a very diverse person, only because like, hey, my background is like, I was a physical scientist, and then I was an engineer, and then I was a physicist and a chemist and an educator, right? And I like went through all of these things, and that is diversity. I have like a diverse experience. And I think getting to the point that Dominga said about like this idea of inclusion, right? And what Tony was saying about like actual equity, right? Those things I think are also not that clear. When you think about like, what is the definition of diversity? Okay, cool. We understand that it's about getting different ideas together in one place to expand everyone else's thought. But what is inclusion, right? Inclusion means I'm actually valuing and including those diverse ways of thinking, right? I'm actually utilizing them in the decisions that I make. I'm using them in all of the things that I do. And then equity is about, you know, like making sure that everybody has the same chances to learn the same things. Everyone can get the same outcome, right? Because there's equality, which means, hey, I'm just going to give everybody the same thing. I can give all you guys $300 right now. Some of y'all don't need $300, right? I could use $300, I'm not going to lie. But I bet that some of you students, especially if you're coming from a community college, you could really use $300 right now, right? And so equity is more about, okay, how about I want everybody to achieve the same thing. I'm going to give everybody what they need to achieve that one thing, right? And so it's not about, let me just give everybody the same thing, because that's not what we need right now, especially when we're talking about diversity and inclusion. That's all I wanted to add.
Excellent. Thank you, Desiree. And I would, very definitely very good points. And I wanted to kind of continue that conversation on those differences that you mentioned right now. And I think some of the other layers of diversity that we oftentimes don't hear about or see too much, sometimes are unseen, right? So it can be folks that are ability limited, right? So folks that have, what would be referred to as a disability. It could be, folks with different sexual preference. It could be folks with different socioeconomic status. It could be folks that don't have access to the technology that maybe might be required, especially in times like right now, right? And so all these conversations when we talk about diversity really include a lot of different groups that oftentimes get forgotten or get othered, if you will. And so as we're having this conversation about what diversity is and how it can look like, or how do we define it, and we're, I want to invite you all to remember your time as an undergraduate student, right? And I know Dr. Bergasser mentioned this a little bit earlier, how the mentality kind of shifted, right? You learn as you go and you change on. And one of the main things that we want you to take away from this dialogue today is how to prepare yourself. Well, one, to define what diversity can mean to you, but also how do you prepare to still remove those barriers, which was, really my definition of equity would be to remove barriers, remove the barriers that are in the way that keep people from reaching that level of success, whatever that may mean for them. And so how along this conversation do we define what diversity is, but how do we prepare ourselves to be mindful of the diverse groups around us, and how do we continue to chase what it is that we're after in our professional, personal, and academic careers, right? Because I think oftentimes the other thing is that we try to compartmentalize, but when in reality, we're the same person, right? I know it took me a long time when I started community college to learn that even though I took off the backpack and I left it in the corner of the room, that at the end of the next day, I was going to have to turn in homework. So even though I might have forgot, right, because I was only a student when I was at school, I still ended up being that same person, whether or not I had to go to work, whether or not I had to be a parent, whether or not I had to go to school. It was the same facets that made me who I am. So along that conversation, I would invite the panelists right now. I want to invite you all to kind of, if you had something of substance to share with the students in the, to contribute to their journeys as they move forward through undergraduate education and graduate and professionalism, what would you say to them? What is it that you would encourage them to take into consideration, especially if they're coming from underrepresented backgrounds, especially if they're first generation, especially if they've seen that they're connected to one of these groups that we've considered diverse, right? Because we're all from a diverse group.
I have a couple thoughts I might add. Actually, Desiree, you want to go first?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. I think we all talked at some point about mentors, and I would say that's one of the most important things as you're proceeding in your major, or as you're considering going to college, or you're considering going to graduate school. Having a mentor, and even more than one mentor, and sometimes mentors don't necessarily have to be professors. They could be, a graduate student or a postdoc. It could be a peer, or maybe a senior undergraduate when you're a junior undergraduate. But having someone that is able to, communicate sort of, what are the opportunities, what are sort of, here's the professors you should not take classes from, here's the professors you should take classes from, those kind of things. I think having that infrastructure is really important. And you can ask, right? You can ask out. You can say, hey, if you have a professor that you enjoyed their class, ask that professor, would you serve as a mentor? Would you be someone that I could just come in and drop by and ask questions for? I was lucky enough to have that as an undergraduate because I had Dr. Wright, but I also had other graduate students that were just in that department. One was my TA, and I said, hey, I've really enjoyed your class. Can you just tell me what it's like to be a physicist? Because I don't even know what that means. And the other thing I would give advice, and this is something I see particularly in my large classes, is to really, and this gets to Desiree's point about what's important is that you have the resources to get here, and it's not that we all give the same resources to everyone. It's that you should have the resources you need to succeed. And what I often see, particularly from students from community colleges, is that they don't know that sometimes they have to ask for those, and they may feel uncomfortable asking for those, particularly when it's this scary white male professor. And I can tell you that the white students are asking for this stuff all the time, right? So don't be afraid to ask the professor for, hey, I had this issue with Zoom and I wasn't able to come to the meeting, or Gradescope failed, so I couldn't upload. Could you help me with that? We're here to help, and we really want to make sure that you succeed. And sometimes we don't know what the problems are, and it can feel uncomfortable to ask us as professors. But I can assure you that many of the professors are very eager to help and fix problems that are there. And sometimes it just takes the student to point that out.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Bergesser. You brought up a point that kind of made me think of another type of diversity that we oftentimes don't think about is also diversity of different disciplines that we're in, right? As we continue to move forward as scientists, we have the tendency to think like a biologist and only a biologist, and not think how can we do more interdisciplinary type work, right? So even in that sense, if you really think about it, you can slice it up in many different ways, but think of the incredible contributions that interdisciplinary science leads to, right? And that'll give you a pretty clear picture of, if we think of diversity in other contexts, also the contributions that could be made overall to not only science, but our society as well. Desiree, you had something that you wanted to add, right?
Yes. So first off, I want to second everything that Dr. Burgesser just said. Go talk to your professors, go to their office hours. I came from community college and I never went to any office hours because it's not required. And then I go to UCLA and I straight up failed a class because apparently they give quizzes in the discussion sessions. And I didn't even know that was a thing. I was like, discussion session, what is that, right? So go to your office hours, go talk to your TAs, go talk to your professors. I used to be a professor, and I'm telling you, we're here for you. We're that's literally what we get paid for, is to teach you and support you to be the best you. So go talk to your professors. But on top of that, the original question was how can we as people prepare ourselves to face issues with equity or inclusion and diversity. And one thing I would say is every single person here, really think about what your privilege is, right? It's easy for me to say, oh, I'm a Blaxican woman. I'm all the minorities in one, right? And it's no, actually I'm not, right? I'm an American citizen, okay? I was born in this country, right? My body is fully able, right? I am actually, I am a straight cis hetero person. I have things that I am privileged in the sense that society sees me as a normal human, right? Granted, there are other things they don't see me as, right? I look like this, and so they're oh, you're not that smart, right? I can tell you as a chemical engineering major, I was the only there were 2 Black women in my engineering classes, and there were 2 Latinos. There was me and one other Mexican dude. And that's it. Everybody else was either white or Asian. And being the only one, which I'm so used to, Dr. Burgesser was just saying, you go to a physics conference, it's a bunch of white dudes, right? There aren't a lot of women. And then I'm sure that when you went to the National Society of Black Physicists, there were a bunch of Black dudes, but not a lot of Black women, right? There's just not a lot. But it's important to even though you can recognize where you are a minority, right, and where you don't have privilege, I think it's also important for us to recognize where we do have privilege so that we can use that privilege to move forward and help others who don't have that same privilege as us, right? We can help to provide them and remove barriers for them to reach the same point that we're at, right? A friend of mine and I had a conversation earlier that was about, like, instead of using your privilege, we should have a discussion about ceding your privilege. Like, I give my privilege to you. Like, I don't need it, right? But I want to use it to help you. And one of the ways that we can help is to just, I give it up. Like, you can have it.
Excellent points. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Whitmore. You know, we keep hearing about the value of diversity, the value of mentors. And then we also heard, though, that it's, you know, the majority is white male. So I gotta ask, when you think about your mentors that you've had, you know, have they all looked like you? Should we just, you know, stress to go look for people that look like us? Because if we are, we're probably not going to be so successful in finding, you know, Black or brown, Latino or woman scientists or PIs or faculty members. Do they always look like you? Dominga, would you like to share
Can I
on
say
that?
something? I hope not, because in my lifetime, I mentored about 250 kids, and they were Native American or Hispanic, 90%.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Yves. Dominga, would you like to chime in on that?
Yes. So a couple of things that was mentioned, or maybe I'll share with my experience. I came from community college. I loved it. Didn't go to office hours as well as Desiree also shared. And when I went to my first quarter at UC San Diego, did not go well. It was horrible. And one of the things that as I reflect on it right now, was one of the things that I should have recognized instantly is the privilege that I had or did not have at UC San Diego. Completely different environment, not a lot of Latinos in my engineering courses. I wished I would have taken physics with Adam. I repeated one of the physics like twice, and I was like, why? I'm really good at this. I loved it in community college. What happened? A very different environment, and I had to look for help, and not just help on my homework, but look for that support, that community. And I did not find it in my department. I found it outside of my department. And one of the things that I wish I would have known back then is that, you know, keep knocking on doors, keep knocking on those professors' doors. There are great professors that may not be in your department, or they may be there, that will help you. I was lucky enough to find maybe 2 in my department that really supported me to continue pursuing my education and helped me get to where I am right now. And they don't look like me. The one that does look like me, Dr. Mario Aguilar, who was part of EAOP, he pushed and pushed and pushed so much. But it was so interesting because he saw something in me that I didn't believe in myself. I didn't think I was graduate student quality. I didn't think I was going to be where I am right now. And it's these other mentors and people that you work with that see your potential. And I think it's important to find that community, to find that support group, whether it's in your major or not, but that small little niche. And I think they have a Raza Center, right, at UCSD, which is something that we didn't have before. So I think that these little community places are important. I think that you should feel comfortable enough to ask for help, and keep knocking on doors, because there is a lot of support out there that we don't know of until later, or unless we network with others.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Dominga. And thank you, Yves mentioned earlier too, he's a colleague of mine in the nanotechnology, nanoscience field. Again, sharing testimony that they don't, you know, students don't always have to look like the mentors that we seek out. As a matter of fact, probably more than likely, the mentors that are going to have the access to power and resources might not necessarily look like you, right? And so just keep that in mind. You know, it's definitely something that you're going to have to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable in approaching folks, in looking for opportunities and advocating for yourself. I want to take a moment and just do a time check. We are about 10 minutes to our closing. I wanted to lend this opportunity to, most importantly, to all of you that are joining us and entertain any questions that you might have for any of our guests at this time. So I know this is where it gets a little awkward when we're doing virtually. So if you want to add your question in the chat, we'll be happy to address it in that sense. If you want to unmute yourself and ask the question, that's okay too. If you want to raise your hand and I can see you on the screen here, I'll be more than happy to call on you. So any questions out there in our virtual world here?
Speak, people. Eve's had a question.
Okay. I embrace diversity. I think that, like multidisciplinary, knowledge coming from chemists, biologists, artists, and so forth is always going to be a plus in solving societal problems. And so is diversity of people. However, I think that in addition to mentoring the people who have been lucky enough to get to the system, the college system, I believe that we need societal transformation. We need to solve a very big problem, such as systemic racism. We have also to work on the education system, the way it's financed, for example, in California, where your chances to get to a great college depend on your zip code. And that is unfortunate, but personally, I think that we need to work not only to mentor, and help and encourage, diversity for the people who have reached this level. But I believe that seriously, we need to bring transformation and, societal transformation in order effectively to kill the biases and also provide the economic, needs that everyone in this society, because in California, we're all equal, right? That's about equity. Everybody should have the same chance to go to Stanford, UCSD, and so forth. So I think there's a lot of work behind the scene that, we need to do.
Absolutely, Yves. Thank you for bringing that up and giving space to that. I'm glad to see that we have colleagues like yourself that are going to help us move forward with those efforts. We do have a question here that I want to bring up, and the question is, what advice would you give to someone who feels out of place so that they can maintain motivation to strive for their goals? All right, Dr. Bell?
Keep looking for your source. As Dominga said before, it might not be easy. I mean, speaking on what Desiree also said, because, you're always referred to as a only. I mean, I got my PhD at NYU and, went out through, lived in the Northeast, but people would always say, oh, you're a chemist? You don't look like a chemist. It's like, what is that supposed to mean, right? So it's like, I feel your feelings of isolation. And yeah, you just gotta, unfortunately, keep working, keep moving, keep trying to find that source of nourishment that you need. And also, often on a side point here too, I mean, as scientists, we often tend to think kind of linearly in our experience. Don't be afraid to try different things, okay? I've heard this in Desiree and Dominga's story, and mine as well. It's like, I tried this, I didn't necessarily like that, I moved to something else. It's not like, I want to get this, I want to get my PhD, I want to do these things. I often thought like that. And in the end product, or I won't call myself an end product, but the point is, it's like, be courageous. Don't be afraid to think that, okay, I tried this and it didn't necessarily work out. You can try something else, okay? I mean, you can definitely do that. Don't get pinned into thinking that, okay, just because I said I want to be a biology major or a chemistry major, I got to do this. There's something else out there for you. And if you're discouraged, just please keep looking. I was discouraged too.
Absolutely, great input on that. Desiree, go ahead.
I just want to add real quick before we get to Arturo's question, like on top of what Tony is saying, I think it's really important to know that there's this word called imposter syndrome, and it's a real thing. And students of color and first-generation students, like, we experience it more than others, right? It's a real thing. We feel like we don't belong because we're the only one. We're surrounded by people who don't look like us. We're surrounded by people who don't act like us, who don't talk like us. And we feel like we're not supposed to be here. Like, I'm not actually good enough to do this. I promise you, you are, okay? I'm the head physicist at, like, the best science museum. And you know what? I still believe that I shouldn't be. Like, I'm not actually good enough to do this job, except I know that I am, right? You have to always like remind yourself of your accomplishments and what you did to get to where you are, right? And the key is to not compare yourself to your neighbor. The key is to compare yourself to yourself, right? Where are you? And how did you get to where you are? Like, don't think about like, oh, well, I'm not this guy who had the job before me, because I am not, and I'm not gonna be. He was an old white dude. Like, I'm not an old white dude, right? I have a totally different experience, and I still deserve to be here. That's all.
Great points, Desiree. And I would add just to that, as we transition to the next question here from one of our attendees, that you can't compare yourself to everybody else, right? Your story is going to be unique. Your background is going to be unique. Culturally, things could be different. The expectations could be different. There could be a difference between you and a twin brother or a twin sister that you have, right? And what's expected from you, not only from yourself, but from your family, from society, and so on and so forth. So it can be a very lonely journey for you in STEM oftentimes, as you heard many of our panelists share. They were oftentimes the only person that looked like them in their classes. It could be that there's going to continue to be challenges like that. So the quicker we get okay or comfortable with the fact that I'm going to learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable, I think the quicker you're going to get yourself prepared to continue to venture out in those new spaces with a little bit more facility. The next question and this will be the last question that we have here is we're asking how do you prepare yourself to embrace diversity when there are backgrounds from individuals from a very closed-minded childhood due to poor education from their parents' background? How do you remove that fear? And I think if I understand the question correctly, is if you're coming from a background where maybe education might not be valued as much as it could be, how do you overcome those challenges, those minimal expectations or no expectations that might be existing growing up? Anybody care to chime in on that? And Archie, did I get that question right?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Anybody want to chime in on that? Dominga or Desiree or Dr. Bell?
So, who asked that question? Arturo. So I'm a first generation college student. I was actually trained to be a housewife. In my culture, young ladies are trained to be a good wife, not to go to college. And I had a constant battle with my family members about that. And one thing that I learned is to respect their culture, to respect their point of view, and try to not have them understand, because until this day, sometimes they still don't understand, but to believe in myself and to know I knew that I was doing the right thing. Keep in mind that they have their childhood was different, their education was different. And so it's still a struggle. It's still a struggle. I've learned so far to kind of block it out and just be, nice about it and just move along. But I did struggle for a while. Like I said, I was a single parent, and so it's, you just keep going. You have your own personal goals. There are so much other types of support on campus that can help you, and try to keep that relationship. I think I struggled a lot with my mom, is who I struggled with. And so it was maintaining that relationship and trying to explain to her why this is a good idea. Right now, she checks in with me every day. She doesn't understand what the PhD process is. She's asked around and she's asked other people to know, and it's changed a lot. So just stay hopeful.
Excellent. And that brings us to also the point of mentors and the value of surrounding yourself in this newer environment that perhaps is new to you. Your family, as Dominga mentioned, is not familiar with it, but your mentors and your colleagues, they are becoming familiarized with it. They are familiarized with it, and so then again, it just reinforces the value of having that. We'll do I want to take a moment to just answer this very last question that came up just last. I know we're a couple of minutes over, folks, and I ask you to just bear with me. It's a very important one. And so this is with respects to the encouragement that we receive to seek out professors, during office hours and mentors. But the question is, this is great during the academic year, but what happens during the summer? What happens during the summer when everybody's gone, or you want to respect their space and their privacy? Where to then? What are your suggestions for staying in connection or staying in touch with these potential mentors or professors, and respecting at the same time their lives and their space? Any suggestions on that?
Don't respect their space. Just email. I mean, this is what we're here for. I mean, I think I answered this one privately too in the chat. But yeah, I mean, that's what we're here for. We want to help, and you can get the message if that person doesn't respond or might not. Then you got to have the courage. You got to move on. And it's one of those things. Unfortunately, the system hasn't corrected itself so that the second person that you reach out to doesn't feel welcoming and able to help you. But it's hopefully we got some, a foothold to try to make this happen. But yeah, bother them, bug them.
So I'm hearing another nicer way to hear that is that you got to advocate for yourself, folks.
Yes, advocate for
you
yourself.
got to advocate for yourself like it's nobody's business, right? Because it is nobody's business. It's not your parents, not your significant other, not even the professors, right? It's going to be your responsibility to tell people how great you are and why they should invest in you. Okay.
And also look into programs like camp. I know that camp helped me a lot. Not only did they provided a stipend to work with any professor that I selected. And this time I was going and knocking on doors and interviewing, hey, this is what I'm interested in. Do you think I can be part of your group? And they also offer opportunities to take a professor out for coffee or for lunch. So look for those types of programs that, you can email them, hey, I'm inviting you to lunch. I think you get reimbursed or they pay for it. I'm not sure how it works now, but there are programs out there that can help you bridge have a communication bridge with the professor.
Absolutely. Great points. And so that just brings us up to our closing. I did want to thank you all for being with us. And I want to encourage you all to continue to visit our series, because we will be touching on a lot of these other topics, like the value of research experience, and getting exposure to different instructors, faculty members, mentors, programs like the ones that Dominga mentioned and that some of our instructors here are involved with. So let's how do we give a warm round of applause to our panelists on here? We do the little icon, right? So, okay, or there you go. Let's just do. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Unmute yourselves. I want to hear applause.
That's right. Unmute yourselves. Here, I can. All right.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's how you advocate for yourself. I want to hear an applause. Thank you so much, not only to our panelists, but to all of you wonderful people for joining us today. Thank you for your input. And again, I can't emphasize enough, we look forward to seeing you at the next sessions that we're going to be having. Please be there. Let us know if there's something specifically that you want to hear about. Feel free to contact us. And a special shout out and thank you to my very dear friend, Laura Santos, who's actually the brains behind the whole operation here, just kind of keeping us together and sending out the emails. So thank you very much. With that, we'll conclude this session and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.